$760 million. One contract. But that's the top rung of the ladder. It's not where it starts. No. It starts at $700 a month in the minor leagues, grinding away. Now, I played professional baseball for 11 years. I was the 9th overall pick. I was a top 100 prospect in all of baseball. I got to the big leagues at 20 years old. I got to arbitration by 26. But after that, my rungs were over. I never reached the top rung. And in today's video, I'm going to walk you through each rung of the ladder that a Major League Baseball player climbs from draft day to $760 million contract. And I'm going to show you, if you're a player out there, what you need to do it right, both financially and to avoid the boat sinkers along the way. And if you're a fan out there, I'm going to show you what this looks like, but from an inside baseball perspective. So let's dive in. Now, before we get to the money, I want to show you what you're actually up against. You see, me saying that these players have defied the odds doesn't really do it justice. So take a look at this chart. Each one of those little blue dots you see is 500 Little League Baseball players. You see that one little blue dot that's turned gold? That's the chances of you signing the $100+ million contract. Or said another way, the top rung in this ladder. So 2.5 million kids, and just one of them is going to sign that contract. Now, if that doesn't stick with you, how about this? You are more than likely, in fact, 33 times more likely to get struck by lightning than you are to sign that contract. See, these players that climb the ladder, they didn't just defy the odds once. They defied the odds over and over and over and over again. So let me show you exactly what that looks like. You see, it all starts on draft day. And let's use Ethan Holiday as an example. Ethan was a top pick in last year's Major League Baseball draft. He signed for $9 million. And this was the first step of him defying the odds. He had about a 1 in 400 chance as a Little Leaguer of ever getting drafted into Major League Baseball. But there he was, the 3rd overall pick in the draft. And you see, from a financial perspective and from a money perspective, what I'm always thinking about for players at this stage is we have to be cognizant that this could be the last big check that we ever make. So we have to be treating this money like, even though we're a top pick, even though we've defied the odds once, we might not defy the odds again. We might not ever get a huge paycheck again. So we truly have to be protecting this money for the future. You see, most fans don't realize that this $9 million signing bonus that Ethan got was paid out over 2 years. You're getting some of the money in year 1, and you're getting some of the money in year 2. Now, with some really good planning, you can even avoid state income tax on this by shifting your residency to places like Florida, Tennessee, Texas, places that have 0 state income tax. Because remember, if this was the last big money that you were ever going to earn, you want to make sure that you keep as much of it in your pocket as you possibly can. You see, if you're an athlete out there, or if you're a family of an athlete out there and you're at this stage right now, this is exactly what we help players with that moment. So if this sounds like you, here's a link to schedule a call with our team and see if we're fit to help you. So Ethan signed, he got his contract, he defied the odds. Well, let's talk about what the next stage is going to look like. Because at this stage, the money stops and the grind starts. Take Connor Griffin, for example. Connor is the number 1 overall prospect in all of Major League Baseball. So not only did he defy the odds in getting drafted, he now defied the odds and he's the best player in the entire minor league system. And you might be thinking, well, Connor's probably making tens of millions of dollars a year if he's that talented. No. He's making somewhere between $700 a month and $2,500 a month. See, I said the money stops and the grind starts, and I was serious. Most minor league players are making somewhere between $20,000 a year and $35,000 a year. And they're only getting paid during the season. So from a money perspective, what I'm always thinking about for players at this stage is how can we use the money that we're earning, although not a massive amount, to be able to fund our lifestyle. And you might be thinking, well, is there even enough money there? But here's a little inside baseball for you. The team pays for a lot of this. They're going to pay for the travel. They're going to pay for a player's housing. They're going to pay for most of the player's food. So when it comes to expenses, there's really not that many external expenses a player has if he chooses to live frugally at this stage of his career. Now, the truth is, most guys don't make it past this rung. Rung 2 is where a careers end, where careers go to die. But if you can survive this rung, one phone call can change everything. And let me show you what I mean. You see, that phone call will lead you to being one step away from the show. Take Andrew Painter, for example. Andrew was a first-round pick just a few years ago in Major League Baseball. He's absolutely cruised through the minor leagues, and he is on the doorstep of the big leagues. And the Philadelphia Phillies added him to their 40-man roster this year. So what does that mean, added to the 40-man roster? Well, what it means is you're like a SpaceX rocket. Elon has stood you up, and he's sitting there with the big red button. And all he has to do to get you to launch into the big leagues now is to hit the big red button. And there you go. Because the checks have been done, all the calculations have been made, you are good to go. The team is saying, we think you're talented enough to be here, but we haven't quite hit that big red button yet. You see, from a spending perspective here, players are making roughly $63,000 minimum on the 40-man roster. So all of a sudden, you're starting to get a little bit more financial flexibility. It's not just the money that you signed for in the draft. The other thing that most people don't see is that players are also starting to get the benefit of the MLB benefits plan. Because at this stage, you are now part of the MLB Players Union, and you're added to what's called the healthcare plan, where all of a sudden the team is paying all your premiums. And when I talk about a healthcare plan, this is the healthcare plan, like the best healthcare plan I've ever seen in the world. It pays for absolutely everything. Deductible? Not a chance. Yeah, you're making more money. Yeah, you're right there on the tarmac and you're one big red button push away from being in the big leagues. And if anything ever happens, you have incredible benefits around you. Now, in a minute, I'm going to talk about how Tarek Skubal changed almost every rung of this ladder when he signed for tens of millions of dollars. But before we do that, let's talk about the next rung. See, because being on the 40-man roster is just getting to the tarmac. You're not actually taking off yet. But when you do, everything changes. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. Take Paul Skeens, for example. Paul was a top pick in the draft. Paul cruised through the minor league system. He got added to the 40-man roster. And the Pirates called him up to the big leagues, where everything changed. Paul's now making $780,000 a year as a league minimum. In fact, as a player who's making league minimum, but in his second year, he actually got a raise from that. So he's making roughly $1 million a year. But here's the thing that most people don't see with this. Paul only had a roughly 10% chance of getting there. And I don't mean 10% chance as a little leaguer. No, I mean 10% chance from the time he got drafted. So how is that possible? Well, the reality is, of all the players that get drafted into Major League Baseball, like the best players that play baseball in the world, only 10% will ever play one day in Major League Baseball. I'm not talking arbitration. I'm not talking free agent deals. I'm not talking $700 million contracts. I'm talking one day in the big leagues. So for all the players that get drafted, you only have a 10% chance of that. So Skeens has defied the odds several times to get to this rung of the ladder. And from a spending perspective, this is where players have to avoid what I call the locker room effect, which is all of a sudden you're sitting in the same locker room across from somebody who's making $20 or $30 million a year. And you might be making $780,000 a year as league minimum, a ton of money, but it's certainly not $20 or $30 million a year. But you're seeing what that guy's driving. You're seeing how that guy's traveling. You're seeing what that guy's buying on the road. And you think you can do it too. And this is a huge boat sinker, a huge trap that I see athletes fall into at this stage. And this is where we have to pull back the reins and remember that in order to win each rung of the ladder, it's not just athletically, but it's also financially. Because these money decisions, they have real consequences. You see, when you start making league minimum and you get to the big leagues, you feel like you've made it. And in a sense, you have. But you have to also understand this is where the real money game starts. In fact, this is where the leverage flips, and all of a sudden you, as the player, start to have leverage. Take Tarek Skubal, for example. Skubal's a back-to-back Cy Young Award winner, and he used his leverage this past year to sign a $30+ million deal in arbitration. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is arbitration? Arbitration is a 3-year process, a series of 1-year deals over and over and over again. And what it actually looks like for players is this. You have to get on the hype train enough that a team wants you in that first year arbitration. And then you got to perform well enough in the next year, and the next year, and the next year to actually stay on that hype train. But if you do, you can be like Tarek Skubal, where all of a sudden you can use your leverage, all the performance you've had in your career up to this point, to leverage the team into paying you what you're actually worth. And in Skubal's case, it changed the entire market. You see, to get to this rung, we're talking a 1 in 5,000 chance. 1 in 5,000. And from a money perspective, the thing that we have to be aware of is these are not long-term contracts. No. They might be worth tens of millions of dollars like Skubal's, but they are 1-year contracts. So we have to be treating this like this could be the last rung that we ever stand on. If you don't believe me, this is the last rung that I ever stood on. See, when I got drafted 9th overall, I thought for sure I was going to get to the top rung of this. See, when I was a top 100 prospect in all of baseball, I thought for sure I was going to get to the top rung. And when I got to the big leagues as a 20-year-old, I certainly thought I was going to be playing in the big leagues 10 years later. But this is where my career ended. My career ended at this rung. And not at the end of this rung, at the very, very beginning of this rung, right as I was starting to grab hold, I slipped off. And that's the reality. It's very hard to defy the odds over and over and over again. That's why I'm making this video in the first place. Yes, we help players that have signed $100 million contracts make smart decisions with their money. But this video is meant for the 18-year-old that's just starting out that has a signing bonus. It's meant for the player that's going through arbitration for the first time and all of a sudden he's figuring, I'm going to make millions of dollars. How do I make sure that I can actually maximize this too? You see, I've been in those shoes where you've defied the odds over and over and over again. You've bet on yourself over and over and over again, only to realize that you finally have a little bit of leverage. But the leverage isn't totally on your side yet. Not until you break through to the next level. You see, after 3 one-year prove-it deals, you gain all the leverage in the world. All of a sudden, every team can buy for your services. And you can use your performance to make sure that all those teams know how valuable you can be for them. Consider Juan Soto. Juan Soto didn't sign a $700+ million free agent deal without other suitors. He had teams vying for his interest. But here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't see in all this. When we think about agents in this process, we think about agents as our chief negotiator as a baseball player. But I'm here to tell you that it's not always as the chief negotiator. In fact, I would argue they're the chief storyteller. You think about these top free agents. These agents have been planting seeds for years with fans, teams, with owners, with other players about how their player could impact that team, about how their player could get that team over the hump. See, as a chief storyteller, you have to be able to share how that player can get your team to the next level. But here's the reality from a spending perspective at this level. Athletes all of a sudden go from athlete to CEO. You think you had a target on your back in the first 5 rungs of this. Well, at rung 6, that target is huge. And it's about protecting your interests, both on and off the field. It's about starting to think about, how do I position this money, not just for today, not just for my post-playing career, but for generations to come. It's about thinking about trust planning and what I'm going to do for the next 20 or 30 years with this money, not just the next 2 to 3 months. It's protecting myself from everybody that's around me that's coming to me with all these different ideas. It's about having the right people and the right team around you. You see, no longer are you just an athlete. You're the CEO of your entire business operation. To understand how rare it is to sign a contract like Juan Soto signed, not just a $100 million deal, a $700+ million deal, you would have to take all the Little League baseball players in the entire United States, and you'd have to multiply them by 2, and then you'd have to choose one at random, and that one would sign Juan Soto's contract. So when I say that Juan Soto defied the odds, I truly mean he defied the odds. $760 million. One contract. But here's what I want you to take away from this video. The ladder isn't just about the top rung. No, it's about doing everything right at each rung. You see, because at each rung is real money, it's real consequences, and it's real actions that you need to take as a player. The reality is, there's a lot of players that climb each rung of this ladder, but still lose in the long term because they weren't thinking about these things as they were climbing. The ones who win, though, they treated every rung of the ladder like it was the last one that they were ever going to stand on. So if you're a player out there and you're reaching that next rung of the ladder and you want help with this, book a call with our team. It's exactly who we help. People like you. And if you're a fan out there, which one of these rungs surprised you the most? And what other content do you want to see? What behind baseball, sports and money, athlete money decisions do you want me to talk about next? Leave it in the comments below. As always, my goal is to help you get smarter with your money. Until next time, my friends.